Welcome to Loren Reads to You. Today we're reading The Bedtime Killer by Loren Malloy. That's me. So make sure you subscribe or follow wherever you're watching or listening to this. And if you haven't heard or seen chapters 1 through 13, you might want to pause and save this and go back and watch and listen to those and then come back to this. But it's up to you. If you're ready, get cozy, get comfy, and let's get into chapter 14. Chapter 14. He can still remember that fateful night that changed their relationship forever. He went back to Miss Barbie's house and dismantled her air conditioning unit, so she had to keep her windows open. She couldn't afford to get it fixed, so it stayed broken just like he wanted. He began to take to watching her sleep, as he did with all his lovers. He had spent 2 weeks watching her. He especially liked to watch her sleep on those very hot summer nights. She liked to sleep nude during the nights like those. He sat right outside her bedroom window on the now broken central air system, watching her through the slits in her white wooden blinds. It happened to be a particularly very hot, humid summer night while he was watching her. She rolled over, facing the blinds, and opened her eyes. Looking directly through the same slits in her blinds, she locked eyes with him. She had awoken to be confronted by the coldest, darkest eyes, which seemed to almost glow with evil intent at her. Her eyes became so very wide with fear, her sweet, succulent mouth frozen in an O formation. Time seemed to stand still, when suddenly she screamed a high-pitched shriek. Unlike Betsy, he planned this latest date with his lover, Miss Barbie. He knew, with the air conditioning broken, it wouldn't take long to hear his cries of passion and wake her up. He needed her to hear him this time, so he kept stroking little Horace and moaning loudly at her, "Oh yeah, it's bedtime, baby." The moment their eyes met, he shuddered. He didn't expect his lover to reach for her phone to call the cops, but it triggered him to quickly burst through her open window. He grabbed her face with one of his huge, sweaty, dirty, meaty mitt of a hand and made sure he was covering her mouth. In doing so, he had smothered the scream and at the same time caused him to be filled with even more desire for his lady love. He was actually touching and against his newest lady. The realization of it, all along with the physical contact, overwhelmed him. Horace began jerking off while staring into her eyes, and he only stopped when a searing hot pain flashed through him. His little Miss Barbie had clawed his face and arms in wild hysteria, but that was all Horace needed to spur him on. In that moment, Horace's reoccurring wet dream came to life. He was positive this was a message he was doing what he was meant to do. He also was sure this was a sign from Miss Barbie that he had her permission to truly consummate their love. Instinct, rage, and lust seemed to completely consume him in that moment. He grabbed one flailing arm and quickly snapped her forearm, making clawing at him from now on impossible. The pain was too intense. Miss Barbie screamed through Horace's hand. Horace then grabbed her head next with both hands and whispered, "Nice and tight," before he twisted. He twisted so fiercely and so hard, he ripped her head clean off her spine. Her face was now permanently stuck in shock. Her eyes were wide open, and so was her mouth. She, still looking like if she could, she would, continued to scream. Bits of flesh and blood were dripping everywhere. Fascinated, he just stared at her still dripping head, while shoving little Horace into her wide-open mouth. Her eyes blinked several times after her head was ripped off. Horace thought, well, that proves that fact after shuddering his release, and he dropped her head onto the pillow. He was filled with such a rush of adrenaline and ecstasy, he felt high, higher than he had ever felt before. For some reason, it caused Horace to get hysterical. It was seeing little Miss Barbie's frightened and shocked, dead, pale head on her pillow. He was so frenzied from the rush of killing her, he thought it was the funniest thing he had ever seen. When he was able to stop laughing, he stared down at Miss Barbie's naked body, which was lying on the floor, sans her head. He felt completely at peace. It only seemed to happen when he was looking at a lover of his without their heads. He laid down with her decapitated body and showed her how men show their love to their lady. He then stood up, took a pillow, and put it where her head was. Horace placed it where her body would have been. Horace began to rub little Horace against the silky pillow while staring into his lover's eyes. It only took a few minutes for him to make a mess and sigh with relief.
"Look, it's like you're playing hide and seek with your body,"
he said in an eerie, unnatural, high-pitched giggle to his voice. It was like he was high in opium. He really never felt a high like this before. His beautiful, erotic encounter with Betsy paled in comparison to the high he just got from his lovely Miss Barbie. He then picked up her now lifeless, decapitated corpse and carried it to the living room and bellowed,
"Catch me if you can, little Miss Barbie,"
he said with a raspy laugh. Thinking back to that moment, he remembered the feeling that came over him right after he twisted Miss Barbie's head clean off. It wasn't panic or fear. It was pure relief. Suddenly, he didn't feel frustrated anymore. He laid down with his lover on the living room floor and consummated their relationship several times, for a loud noise from a truck passing by startled him back to the reality of his surroundings. He looked up and looked around. His lady's fluids were all over the house and himself. He felt ice in his stomach and felt sick to it also. Moments later, he realized the police. He had to go. Someone had to have heard all of that. Feeling completely panicked, he left the mess for someone else to clean up and went home. He could only imagine what people might have heard and thought himself very lucky for not getting caught by the police already. Horace fled the scene of his date, leaving out the same window, and drove home to shower the blood off. Horace had been in the bathroom for over an hour, making sure every speck of blood and flesh was removed from his person. He kept looking at his hands. He had washed and scrubbed them several times, just as he did after his date with his lover Betsy. He scrubbed them with bleach, then with orange lava soap he had from when he worked on cars. Everyone knew a guy could get in trouble just because he had the ladies' fluids under his nails. No matter which way he looked at his hands, he couldn't see any blood, but he knew it would only take one drop of blood on a guy and he could be locked up for life. Horace scrubbed them once more after soaking them in bleach. He even dipped little Horace in bleach, just for an extra saving measure. Burned a bit, he thought, but didn't really care. He climbed into his bed with little Horace in hand a second later. Horace replayed his wonderful date over and over in his mind. It didn't take long for little Horace to be completely satisfied. That was chapter 14 of The Bedtime Killer by Loren Malloy. That's me. Make sure you follow and subscribe wherever you're watching or listening to this. And I will see you for chapter 15.